Okay, today we are interviewing for the John Hope Franklin Center for Reconciliation documentary project, Reuben Gant. And Reuben, we're going to start today with some demographic information about you. Just if you could start off with some background information, such as your full name, your place of birth, your parents, your siblings, ancestors, spouse, children, religion, community involvement, and if you could just start at that kick us off here.
Okay, all right. Well, my name is Reuben Charles Gant. I was born in 1952, Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm descendants of, I'm a fourth generation Oklahoman, I guess. My ancestors came in the late 1800s from Starkville, Mississippi, and settled in Gant, Oklahoma, after walking from Starkville to Oklahoma, which was a 2-year journey. I am the youngest of 8 children, born to Amelia and Ira Brooks. Amelia Gant, my mother; Ira Brooks, my father. Youngest of 8. My grandparents were Richard and Ethel Gant. My grandmother was half Cherokee Indian, and they migrated to Tulsa in the early 1920s.
Wow.
I'm Baptist, is my religion. I am a member of Mount Zion Baptist Church. I attended high school here in Tulsa, actually elementary school, junior high school, and high school here in Tulsa. Graduate of Booker T. Washington High School. I attended Oklahoma State University and Southern Nazarene University. Have a Bachelor of Science degree. Played professional football for 7 years in Buffalo, New York. Returned to Tulsa in the early 80s to begin working in corporate America. Lived in Detroit for a couple of years. Returned to Tulsa to start working at the Greenwood Chamber of Commerce, where I am now the president and executive director of the Greenwood Chamber of Commerce, and have been since 1998. I've been involved with a number of community organizations, boards. I've served on the board of Big Brothers and Big Sisters, Planned Parenthood, Tulsa Housing Authority, Boys and Girls Club, Salvation Army, just a number of organizations. I am now an active member of the John Hope Franklin Center for Reconciliation. I'm an active board member there. And here we are.
Yes, yes. The nature of our documentary project is to capture the story of the 1921 Race Riots. We've had the survivor story, which is very powerful, but we're seeking to find out how that story was passed down through the different generations in various families throughout Tulsa. And how was that story passed down within your family?
Well, interestingly enough, I didn't learn about the race riot until I was an adult.
Yeah.
Although I have an uncle, a great uncle, who is a current survivor of the at the time of the riot. I think he was about 4 or 5 years old. And I have a great aunt who when the search for survivors took place in early 2001, she was then living, and one of the survivors. Her name was Wilhelmina Guess How. We never heard about the riot, nor was it a topic of conversation in our family. And really wasn't a topic of conversation until after it came to light, 80-year anniversary, through the efforts of Representative Don Ross and Senator Maxine Horner. Was the riot actually discussed amongst my family members? Even my uncle, great uncle, great aunt never talked about it. My parents at the time lived in Boley, Oklahoma, and actually my mother actually moved here shortly after the riot, but it was never talked about. So I didn't learn about it until I became an adult. Graduated from college. Actually had been off working pro bono. Came back to Tulsa, got involved with the Greenwood Chamber of Commerce, and I learned about the riot.
Okay. Yes, a resident child, young man being raised, reared in Tulsa. How would you describe your experience as an African-American male being raised in Tulsa, Oklahoma during your time, your lifetime?
Well, you know, I was raised under the premise that you don't miss what you never had. And my parents were resilient in that even though we were poor, I don't have remembrances of being poor. We were cared for, our needs were met. We lived in a community that was thriving at the time, being the old Greenwood. Every amenity of daily living was available to us. So as a kid, we were kind of shielded from, say, Jim Crow laws, the effects of segregation. We received in our minds A1 stellar education. We had caring teachers. So, you know, as a kid, just fond memories of growing up. And none of the issues or social issues that one deals with once they become an adult. So it was a pleasant experience. Certainly there are remembrances of Greenwood and what it used to be. And of course, as a kid, it was off limits for us as kids, but somehow we found a way to get here, and so we experienced that. And then being in high school and being involved in sports, we spent a lot of time on Greenwood at restaurants, eating meals, what we call then pregame meals. So, I mean, it was all a good experience growing up.
Was there any type of logistically in Tulsa? Were there areas of Tulsa that you were directed or parents cautioned as far as?
Well, I think it was pretty much understood where our boundaries were and what our restrictions were. And we knew and recognized that there were certain parts of town that we were forbidden to go. So for us, which I'm sure is prevalent amongst a lot of African American children growing up, you have a relationship to the railroad tracks. And so traveling the railroad tracks for us, because the railroad tracks went through the heart of our community and our neighborhood and really led us to the busy and active part of the community. We would get on the railroad tracks and follow the railroad tracks until we got to Greenwood. Or we would get on the railroad tracks and follow the railroad tracks until we got to the park or a rec center where there were extracurricular activity gatherings. So there was a relationship there between our neighborhood and our community and the railroad tracks, because the railroad tracks led us to a lot of places we needed to go.
Interesting. Coming up in your era, your environment, who were some individuals that served as role models to you?
Well, there are a number of individuals in that instance. I lost my parents at an early age, and I was pretty much adopted by the community. I think it was Hillary Clinton that said it takes a village to raise a child. Well, I think I'm a good example of that. I lost my parents as a teenager. A mentor and really an adoptive family of mine was the Daniels, Johnny Daniels and Janetta Daniels. And her son was my best friend. And so they kind of took me under their wing and treated me as a part of their family. And to this day, I feel as if I am a part of their family. And their son is my brother. And being the youngest of 8 kids, when I lost my parents, I was pretty much the only one at home. And I grew up fast. So it was the Daniels family, Johnny Janetta Daniels. I had a lot of mentoring from coaches. Julius Pickies, who is now the president of the John F. Franklin Center for Reconciliation, was a mentor, is a mentor. Coached me in junior high school as a basketball player. His brother, Luther Pickies, also one of my coaches and teachers in junior high school. A teacher by the name of Juanita Lewis that taught me in junior high school. Actually, before there was such a thing as preparatory school preparing you for college, I received that education from Juanita Lewis in junior high school. She prepared us well for college, even while we were in junior high school. I could name a number of teachers. A math instructor in high school named Miss Rouse, a football coach named Ed Lacey, basketball coach named Eddie Evans, English teacher named Margie Barry. I could go on and on. But I had a lot of positive influence in my life from adults who took a liking to me, showed some concern for my well-being, and helped me be the adult that I am today.
Okay. I'm finding through, as you go through this process of the documentary interviews, that the story was sheltered and concealed.
Mm-hmm.
But since you were made aware of that incident, what thoughts or what reflections do you have about that time, and what is your perception how it impacts Tulsa today?
Well, I asked the question of my uncle about why there was not any conversation amongst the family or during family gatherings about the riot. And his answer was they didn't talk about it because they didn't want history to repeat itself. They didn't want the younger generation to become enraged, and Tulsa itself would experience a riot all over again. So they didn't talk about it for that reason, according to him. It was something best to be left alone. And he didn't really become vocal about it until it became a topic of conversation publicly, when Don Ross and Maxine Horner brought it before the legislature. A Race Riot Commission was formed. They actually did research about the race riot, trying to determine culpability. That's when my uncle became very vocal and outspoken about the effects and impacts of the riot. And until then, for me, it was just an occurrence in history and time that was relevant to the climate. Jim Crow laws, segregation, racial tension. But growing up, even though those things were prevalent, I can't say that I really experienced them directly. And again, probably for a couple of reasons. One, I've learned that being involved in sports tends to bring people together more than it tears them apart. You have this camaraderie, you have this respect that is earned, and athletes tend to look beyond, on the field of competition, beyond race, beyond color. They just have this admiration for talent. And so, because I was a good athlete, I got a lot of visibility. I got a lot of attention thrown my way because of the talent that I had. And so, and it opened a lot of doors for me. It created a lot of more palatable social situations than just for the normal individual on the street. And I can remember while being recruited to go to college. I would be invited to dinner at white families' homes in South Tulsa, and I would be the only black in the house or at the dinner table, but it didn't feel strange to me, and why, I don't know. It may be because of the way I was raised. My mother taught me to be colorblind, and the family she worked for as a maid treated her and her family as if we were one of them. And so she didn't harbor any animosity toward white people. And that bled over into how she interacted with us in a family environment. And she would always talk to us about we all breathe the same air, we all bleed red blood, we all want the same things, and that's a better quality of life. And so that one is no different than the other in terms of individuals. White, black, green, yellow, doesn't matter. What matters is they're human beings. And so treat them with respect. Treat them as if you would want them to treat you. And so that's the way we were brought up. And so I like to say that I'm a person of a lot of firsts. I'm sure I was, and for some of these families, I was the first time they ever had a black person in their home. First time they ever ate dinner at their dinner table with a black person. And I learned that it helped to dispel some myths that they may have had about blacks, and which was a good thing. And I don't know what they expected, but maybe they expected this, uneducated, heathenistic savage or something at the table. And I used to always get, I'm surprised at how smart you are, or I'm surprised at, not surprised, but I would get comments about how well behaved I was, or my table manners, or so it just helped dispel a lot of myths that they probably had about black people. So that is a good thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. As part of the John Hope Franklin Center for Reconciliation is one of the goals that we're trying to obtain for the Greater Society of Tulsa. How do you feel we can take this 1921 race rights story, apply it in the 21st century to obtain this form of reconciliation within the various diverse societies that exist here?
Here's what I think is important, and that is the riot represents the greatest act of civil disobedience in American history. And for us as a society, and when I say us, I mean not just African Americans, but this diverse society that we live in, to deny the occurrence or the happening of the riot is a travesty. It's no different than the bombing of the Murray Building in Oklahoma City That was an horrendous act of civil disobedience. But still yet, it was given its place in history, in the annals of history. It's written in the history books, and it's memorialized. And 300 plus people lost their lives in this building, this bombing. Well, the act that occurred in 1921 was even more devastating because it not only impacted the 300 plus families, it impacted 11,000 families because 11,000 families were displaced. Community was burned to the ground. Personal belongings were lost. Fortunes at the time were lost, never recovered. Lives were lost, although it remains controversial as to how many lives were lost. A number of lives were lost, whether it's 30 or 300. Death occurred. And this society, this community in particular, refuses to give this act of civil disobedience its place in American history. And that in itself is a travesty. I would tend to think that if the script were flipped and it were 30 lives or 300 lives that were lost amongst the white population, that its place in American history would be unquestionable. But it happened the other way. And for it not to have its place because of a color line is not right.
Okay, final question. Describe the steps that you feel City of Tulsa or population of Tulsa should take in order to obtain some type of racial reconciliation or coming together of the races.
Okay, well, I think I could probably talk at length about that. But the fact is, this community has never recovered from the effects of the riot. And we're talking 90 years later.
Yes.
It's never recovered from the riot. And I like to think and say, think about, had it not been for the riot, the number of influential, professional blacks that would be here, would have been here to pass down a legacy to their children and grandchildren. And if it's true that Greenwood at the time produced more wealth amongst an African American population than anywhere else in the country, the geography of Tulsa would be much different had the riot not occurred. Had the riot not occurred, the influence of the growth of this city would be remarkably different. And the influences amongst the African American population would be equally different. And would be of humongous impact, not just from a social perspective, but from an educational perspective, from a diversity perspective, from a respect perspective, and I could go on and on. So, an injustice is being done and has been done to the African American community. And I don't know that there is anything that can be done to make amends for that. But what can be done is the city can embrace the event, and the city can give it its rightful place in history, not just in American history, but in the city's history, in the state's history. It can recognize the contributions of African Americans to the prosperity of Tulsa and Oklahoma, for that matter. And what emanated from a prosperous African American community that had an impact on the growth of Oklahoma and Tulsa. That's what it can be.
Okay. Well, Reuben Charles Gant, thank you so much for letting us talk to you today.
Thank you.
And go forth and prosper. Thank you.